What is the most important part of fishing? Well, that is a very loaded question, but when you think about it, there is one part of fishing that is very, very, very important, and that is fishing line. I mean, you know, without fishing line, it's kind of like having a car with no gas. You might have this really nice, beautiful car, but it has no gas in it. It can't do the job that it needs to do. It's the same with fishing line. You may have this beautiful rod and reel, but if you don't know what type of fishing line to put on it for the application that you want to use it for, I mean, you have a useless object sitting in your boat or in the bank or on the kayak, you know what I mean? And when it comes to fishing line, you got to think about it. It's our direct connection not only to our lure, but to the fish as well. And so if the fishing line isn't making the lure do its job the best way, and once you hook the fish, the line isn't doing its job to the best of its ability, it could mean the difference between getting fish into the boat, the bank, or the kayak, or losing them. And so in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about different kinds of fishing line. I'm going to make it really simple. I'm going to give you the type of fishing line, what it does, the benefits, and some of the drawbacks. And I'm gonna let you guys make the choice on what type of fishing line you think that you guys need to use. I'll also talk about what I do with certain types of fishing line and kind of where I use them in different applications. But I just want to give you guys kind of the general 30,000 foot view of what fishing line is and what different types of fishing line does. So let's start with the first one, and probably the oldest of the technologies, and that is monofilament. So monofilament, like I said, is the oldest of the fishing technologies. It's a single strand of nylon material. Now, this nylon material has a lot higher buoyancy than water, so it's actually going to float on top of the water, and it also has a lot of stretch. Now, that can be awesome for if you're looking to fish topwater lures or anything near the surface, because with that line floating on top of the water and with that stretch, it's going to do two things for you. Obviously, it's going to keep topwater lures on top of the water, and then number two, that stretch is going to be able to absorb a lot of impact. A lot of the saltwater guys that I know and guys who go after big predatory fish like muskies and stripers and stuff like that use monofilament because that bigger diameter with that stretch makes that line a lot tougher. Now, there's a couple drawbacks to monofilament and the nylon technology. The first one is going to be it's not very abrasion resistant. So that means if you're dragging it across rocks, dragging it across limbs, things like that, those little micro nicks, those little micro, tears in that line are going to occur, and it can break a lot easier than other types of fishing line just because it's not as abrasion resistant as other types of fishing line. The second one is it's not very UV resistant. So that means if the sun is setting on that line, or you've got your rod or reel setting out in the sun, the UV rays will actually penetrate that fishing line and break it down a lot quicker than other types of fishing line as well. Another drawback is the fact that it's a lot more visible in the water than other types of fishing line, in particular fluorocarbon. And that's just because of that polymer and that kind of nylon material that fishing line is made out of. The UV, like the way the light refracts off of it and reflects off of it, isn't the same as fluorocarbon, and so the nylon is a lot more visible in the water. And so it has its benefits, especially on top of the water if you're trying to fish anything at the top of the water, and that stretch. It can help to make this line just a lot more easy to fish topwater lures and things at the top of the water column, as well as just taking the impact of a really big hit from a really big fish. The next one, like I mentioned just a second ago, is going to be fluorocarbon. Now, fluorocarbon is a polymer base. Now, the polymer that they make these fluorocarbons out of is a lot denser than water, so fluorocarbon is actually going to sink when you put it in the water. Now, a couple benefits to fluorocarbon over monofilament and other types of fish line is that it is very abrasion resistant, it does not have much stretch, and then its refraction rate is almost the same exact as water. So what does that mean? It has a lot more abrasion resistance. So that means as you're dragging things like through rocks, through trees and things like that, it's not going to form those little nicks and those little tears in the line like the monofilament and then braid, like we'll talk about here in just a minute, will. It just has a lot more resistance to that just because of the material that it's made out of. Number two, it has a lot less stretch. So that means if you got a really long cast out on a jig or something like that and you feel a fish bite, when you go to set the hook, that line isn't going to stretch as much. It's actually got minimal stretch, so it allows you to really get a good hook into those fish. But it has a downside, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And then the third one is its refraction rate. So it has almost the same exact refraction rate as water. So what that means is it practically disappears in water. It literally, when you put fluorocarbon water, it's going to be hard for you to see it. It's hard for the fish to see it. It's hard for anything to see it because it literally looks just like water. Now, a couple downsides to fluorocarbon, number one is going to be the price. It is probably next to Braid, if not equivalent with Braid when it comes to price. It's very, very expensive. I mean, when you're looking at a 300-yard spool of premium fluorocarbon, you could be looking at most like $35 or $45 for fishing line, which is a lot for fishing line, but it has that UV resistance, unlike monofilament does, so it's going to last a lot longer than monofilament will. And so you can put fluorocarbon on a spool and it'll last a lot longer. And then number two, because it doesn't have as much stretch, people who don't know how to fish fluorocarbon, if you're not fish fluorocarbon very much and you're used to fishing mono, you'll tend to break it a lot more. And that's just because without that stretch in there, it doesn't have that impact resistance like monofilament does. And so when you go to just, I mean, absolutely swing on one and try to jack its face completely off its body, a lot of the times it will break. And so it's just something to think about when you switch over fluorocarbon. If you put any fluorocarbon on any of your reels or use it as leaders, it is not going to have as much shock resistance as the monofilament will. The next one is going to be Braid. Now, Braid is literally like a string. You know, that's what you can think of it as. It's literally like a bunch of macro strings that have been braided together, normally like a 4, 6, or 8 carrier braid, and it's been braided together. Now, Braid has benefits that fluoro and mono just don't have. Number one being, it is the strongest line of them all because it is literally like rope. I mean, when you use Braid, normally I'm using it in grass with things like frogs, things like topwaters. That's where I use Braid the most, and it's because not only does Braid float, but it also just straight up, you literally can't break this stuff. I mean, unlike fluorocarbon and monofilament, it's just not going to break. A lot of the times, if you get it hung up to the point where you're not going to get it back, you're going to have to cut the line long before you'll ever be able to break it. And so that's the big thing that it does. Another benefit is that because of that, the material of which it's made out of, like rope, it does a really good job of cutting through things like vegetation. That's why I use Braid in vegetation the most, is because unlike fluorocarbon and mono, which will just kind of dig in and wrap up in that vegetation, when you jack one through the grass with Braid, it actually kind of saws through it, almost like a weed eater line does through grass, and it'll saw through that grass and it'll help you to get those fish out of there. Now, Braid also has a couple of downfalls. Even though it is like a super line and a lot of people use it for their main line and then tie on leaders to it, the downfall is it doesn't have much abrasion resistance at all. You got to imagine if you took your shirt and started rubbing it against a rock or a concrete, it's not going to be very long before you wear a hole in that shirt or in your jeans or whatever it is. Braid is the same exact way. They're starting to make some technologies that make it a little bit more abrasion resistant, but for the most part, it's not that abrasion resistant, and you get one little nick in there and it'll cut right through that line. The second downfall is, again, the price. Braid is very expensive, just like fluorocarbon is, and for a premium spool of Braid, 200, 300 yards, you're looking at $35, $40. But the biggest upside to Braid overall, just kind of going off that point, is that a lot of people will put Braid on their reels, and once you put Braid on there, it lasts for freaking ever. I mean, because it doesn't matter if the color fades or if the sun penetrates it or what it does. Just like a shirt, as long as that shirt doesn't break down and holes don't start forming in it, that Braid is going to last a long time. And I have reels with Braid on them that are 3, 4, 5 years old even, and the only time that I replace the Braid is when I've literally cut off and retied lures so much that I need to replace the Braid. And so it's just something to keep in mind, that even though it does have some downfalls, it is a great, like main line for a lot of applications. And for me personally, I use Braid for frogs and grass fishing and for topwaters. And then I use Braid as a main line on my spinning rods, because Braid does have another benefit, which means it is super duper sensitive. Like, you put fluorocarbon to Braid, and that's probably going to be the most sensitive thing that you can have, because it is the material that it's made out of. It's going to translate vibrations and things a lot better than any other material. And so it's great to have a Braid to fluorocarbon, a Braid to mono leader. Then the last one is going to be a copolymer. So copolymer is a nylon base, just like monofilament is, but they mix it with different sorts of materials, different sorts of composites and polymers and things like that. And so you could have like a monofilament core with a fluorocarbon shield, or you could have a monofilament shield with a fluorocarbon core. You can do all kinds of different mixing things. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds when it comes to monofilament and fluorocarbon. And depending on what kind you buy and how the different orientations have been mixed together, you're going to get like sensitivity from fluorocarbon with abrasion resistance like fluorocarbon, but stretch like mono, or vice versa. And so you got to kind of be careful when you're looking at those different types of fishing line. But a copolymer is very interesting. I sometimes fish copolymers with things like bladed jigs and with crankbaits, because that little bit of extra stretch in there can really help to drive hooks home, but I still get like that abrasion resistance of fluorocarbon. So it's a very interesting line. It's something to play with, and it's something to consider, and it's also very, very affordable. So just keep that on your kind of spectrum of things that you want to see. And if you want to see some braid fishing in action, click this video that's popping up right here.